and welcome to Spooky PNW and Beyond. This is your host, Jennifer. Spotify has changed how episodes are uploaded and stuff like that with this new Riverside studio thing. So I'm not sure how everything is going to work, like how it's going to sound, if I can even figure out how to export it and upload it onto the actual podcast itself. So it was a learning experience for me. Welcome along for the ride. Sorry it's been so long since the last episode that I recorded. I kind of fell into a little funk with a lot of different things, so I wasn't really doing much of anything. Don't feel bad if you felt neglected or something. So anyway, our episode for today is going to be a true crime episode, and it involves two gentlemen who in Washington State that were a little murdery, we'll say. So without further ado, Aberdeen, which is the home of Nirvana and once known as the Hellhole of the Pacific due to its high murder rates that William Billy Gohl helped along. Now, don't get the name confused with David Grohl. Definitely not the same thing. Dave is a national treasure, and Billy enjoyed killing people a little too much. During the time of Billy Gohl's murders, Aberdeen, Washington was considered one of the grittier towns in the area, or in the state, excuse me. It was full of saloons and whorehouses and gambling dens. If you've ever been to Aberdeen and Hoquiam, you probably would not be surprised by that news, because there's a reason why the rest of Washington calls Aberdeen Scabbardine and the armpit of Washington. So the whole idea that it was a known as the Hellhole of the Pacific, not surprising to me at all. At all. It is not surprising. So Billy Gohl was an American man of German descent who was thought to have been born around 1860. Though most consensus has his date of birth as 1873, excuse me. But the dates of his birth are kind of one of those things that is a little bit up in the air, because there's not a whole lot known about Billy's early life. And so like when, where, why is not like, it's not a hugely known, like, for certain thing. Billy was also known as the Timbertown Killer. And I think that's the whole, like, his Aberdeen murders and stuff like that. Billy had gone to the Yukon to search for gold at some point in his life. And when he didn't strike it rich, as most people didn't, he came back to Aberdeen to work as a bartender at one of the saloons. And after his stint as a bartender, Billy actually got a job as a union official with the Sailors Union of the Pacific. Billy supposedly had a baby face, and some of the photographs of him, which I will absolutely share on the Instagram, does show him with a bit of a round, kind of youthful looking face. He supposedly, in other words, used these innocent looks to perpetrate his murders on the unsuspecting. So there were quite a few stories of criminal activity that were actually attributed to Gohl. Whether or not it was true, not really certain, but not certain with 100% certainty, but people are pretty certain that it was him. In Alaska, while he was up there trying to strike it rich with the whole gold rush thing, it was said that he started a fire that ended up burning a saloon to the ground. It didn't really say if there was any fatalities during that fire. So, I mean, there could have been, and if he really did start this fire, that would be pretty much where his whole murdery era started. He was also suspected of the disappearance of a man named Jacob Miller and his wife. Human remains were found in the vicinity of a cabin that Gohl had owned and had actually lent out to people. And they believed that these human remains were possibly Jacob Miller and his wife. Gohl was also suspected of cannibalism while stranded in a whiteout blizzard located in Whitehorse, Alaska. It didn't say who or how many people he may have cannibalized, only that he was suspected of it. Which, please don't eat people. It makes you fucking nuts. And is not good for you. So don't do that. Don't imbibe in the long pig. He's even had... Sorry, I lost my place. Gohl was also suspected of being the murderer of a lot of migrant workers who were found washed up on shore and robbed near a saloon where he worked. I can't remember exactly where that was located, but I think it might have been somewhere around in the Washington area. He was even said to have recruited, quote unquote, men who were unconscious for the misery ships that came to the Wishkah Mills for lumber. So that would basically mean that he was like, I don't know if this is like the politically correct term anymore, but they used to call it Shanghaiing people and sticking them on ships and making them work. So that's what that recruiting, quote unquote, men who were unconscious for the misery ships. He did, however, never admit to this, and he was never heard to have been telling anything about this happening. But these actually weren't going to be the murders that would finally do Billy Gohl in. Between 1909 and 1912, Aberdeen would become known as the port of missing men, where sailors would go but never return. Around 200 deceased men would be found around Big Cut between 1903 and 1913, most of which were probably sailors. Most of Gohl's murder victims were sailors who were arriving at the port of Aberdeen, coming to the Sailors Union building after leaving the ship for one reason or another. Usually they were coming to the Union building to deposit their pay after being on the ship for however long they were usually on there. He would ask if these sailors had any family or friends in the area, and when he knew for very certain that they wouldn't be missed in Aberdeen, Billy would shoot them before robbing them of their money and valuables. After killing each man, Billy would dump them into the Wishkah River, where they would remain until washing up on shore to be found by the unsuspecting public. So, I think I talked a little bit about this when I was covering the Starvation Heights woman. I can't remember what her fucking name is off the top of my head. But anyway, after a certain point in time, in my opinion, like, after somebody's been robbing people and killing them, after a certain point in time, it becomes, in my opinion, less about the robbery and more about the killing. Because you can rob people without killing them. Like, you don't have to kill people to rob people, right? So I think that at a certain point in time, it does come to a point where you would rather, like, they enjoyed the killing more than they enjoyed the robbery, even though they did do the robbery to sell their trinkets and stuff like that. I think it's, like, it's not fatal. It's not like, I don't know, it's not robberies gone wrong or anything like that. It's a literal serial killer who happened to have an MO or a, like, I don't know, what do they call it? A trophy type thing where he would, like, take their things, sometimes he would sell it, sometimes he would keep it. At a certain point in time, after 50 some people, like, it's no longer about robbing people. It's about the murder, in my opinion. Whether I'm wrong or not, I don't know, but that's solely my opinion. I think after a certain amount of time, they start to like the killing rather than just the robbing. Billy was a dickhead to the very extreme beyond this whole, like, murdering sailors coming in from the ocean. He often would call the Aberdeen police extremely inept at their job, demanding justice for the killers of these sailors and more protection for the sailors coming in. Particularly dickish, considering Mr. Billy Gohl was the one who was fucking murdering these people. And he was like pissed off at the Aberdeen police because the Aberdeen police weren't doing their jobs to his specifications, apparently. So yeah. So there's also like the whole serial killer thing. Like, a lot of serial killers will do that kind of stuff, will insert themselves into things. So there you go. But that's another nail in the coffin, so to speak, of Billy Gohl liked to kill people. Like, it wasn't just about robbing people or any of that kind of stuff. It was killing people, and the robbery was just an afterthought so he could survive. Billy would eventually murder like 40 some odd men and steal all of their belongings. Like, see, I'm telling you, 40 men murdered for robberies. I just feel like he just really enjoyed himself a little too much. Billy's downfall would be his very own arrogance. He murdered a sailor and found a watch with a name on it. It said August Schluter from Hamburg, Germany. Knowing the watch would be too identifiable, Billy left it on the man before disposing of his body in the Wishkah River. When the body, which they would call floaters, I think they still do, popped up, Billy was able to identify him as August Schluter. The problem was, this man was in fact not August Schluter, and was actually a Danish man named Fred Nielsen, who had purchased the watch in Germany from a man who stamped his pieces with his name. Can you guess what that name is? If you guessed August Schluter, you would be correct. The police knew that there was some guilty knowledge and on Billy Gohl's side of things, and they began to build a case against him. Some of the information I found says that he was arrested on a double murder charge of a man named Charlie Hatberg and a man named John Hoffman, and they caught him with the help of an accomplice to these murders whose name was John Klingenberg. He would, I guess something happened where there was suspicion on both these men, and to get out of things, I would have to read it again. I can't remember. John, and I forgot to write it down in my notes, of course. John Klingenberg kind of rolled over on old Billy Gohl to keep his own ass out of the fire. Billy was convicted of these particular murders in 1913, but did not receive the death penalty as Washington State had repealed it in 1912. Billy would, for the rest of his life, refuse to write a list of victims of all of the men, like that he had killed throughout the years, which was, they estimate 40 plus. Some of them, I think some of them they attributed to him after he died. So yeah, it was pretty sad. Billy, as I said, would refuse to write a list of victims, but several remains that would show up on the shores of the Wishkah would be attributed to him. Billy would be sentenced to life imprisonment and would be remanded to the state penitentiary. Billy would later be taken to Eastern State Hospital in Spokane County, which was an asylum for the criminally deranged. Now, we know my opinion of hospitals for the criminally deranged back then. As I had stated in the episode about haunted hospitals, these places were not nice places. A lot of people at this time who were sent to hospitals, psychiatric hospitals, so to speak, or hospitals for the criminally insane, deranged, etc., they were treated extremely inhospitably. I mean, I don't really I can't say that I feel bad for Billy Gohl because of the shit that he did, but a lot of people who were in these hospitals probably didn't need or deserve to be in these hospitals. So, in the case of Billy, I don't think he was deranged at all. Like he should have remained his ass in the state penitentiary, not removed to a state hospital. I don't think there was a lot of his murders. It was too calculated and too well thought out and too premeditated, in my opinion, for it to be have anything to do with insanity or derangement. So I don't think he should have been sent to this hospital, in my humble opinion. He would actually die in that asylum in 1928, though there are some sources that say he died a year earlier in 1927. He died at the age of 54 from pneumonia and urocephalus. I can't remember what that is. I think it was like I want to say one of the sources said it was like a protracted anus, so like, or rectum. So I don't know. I'll have to look it up again. There is a book that has been written or is in the process of being written about Billy Gohl called The Port of Missing Men. And it is written by, I do believe he's a professor at a college that I can't remember off the top of my head. And his name is Aaron Goings. I might check that out. And if you want to, definitely go for it. Check it out. See what it says. Let me know. Hey. So that was Billy Gohl, not to be confused with David Grohl. And he was a piece of work. Yeah, don't feel sorry for him. I mean, nobody knows what his childhood was like or like his informative years or anything like that. So he might have been, as a lot of people were, in that day and age, had a very tough, rough, and difficult childhood. But as I like to say, those are reasons, not excuses. Just because you have a difficult childhood does not give you the right or entitlement to murder people and rob them and steal their shit. So let's not do that. And if you feel the need to do that, please seek professional help. Thank you. So our next gentleman, his name is Martin Stickles. Now, Martin Stickles actually may have had some mental health issues that may have attributed to his actions, and there's a little bit more known about him than Billy Gohl. So Martin Stickles, who was also known as the Kelso Killer, was born in Adams County, Iowa in 1870. He was actually really young when his family moved to Washington State, just a little over a year old at that time. At the time his trial and execution, his mother would say that Martin had been born a sickly child who would always get mad at everyone without any discernible reason. He was considered to be an unnatural child, quote unquote. More than likely, Martin was born with a mental health disorder, but which one is unknown. I'm not, even though I'm in school to do diagnoses and everything like that when it comes to mental health, I do not have the wherewithal to diagnose or assess somebody who is not alive. I can just go on the summation that, yes, he probably did have a mental health disorder, but which one, I don't know. Very little is known about Martin's early life, except for what his mom shared with the courts and stuff like that. And at the time of the murders, he was living in a scow, which is a type of barge on the river. I don't know if you've ever seen a barge, but they're like flat bottom boats, and they're not, I don't know, I wouldn't live on one. I don't think I would live on one even now. But he was extremely reclusive and sailed along the Columbia, the Cowlitz, and the Coeman rivers, and he earned his living as a fisherman primarily. Martin would kill his first person in 1899 in Kelso, Washington. William Shanklin was a neighbor of Martin, and apparently he had known Martin since he was a very young boy. But on November 22nd, 1899, Martin would shoot William through the window with a rifle while the other man was sitting down to dinner. Afterward, he would break into William's house and steal any valuables that he came across. When he was finished, Martin would set the house on fire and flee the scene of the crime. There was a $300 reward put forth by Governor John Rankin Rogers at that time, which, if you do the conversion into today's money, it would be a little over $11,000. But no one was ever convicted at that time for William's murder. Someone else was suspected as well as tried for the murder, but was released, and supposedly Martin Stickles actually attended that trial. That's pretty fucking brazen. If you think about it, it really is fucking brazen. So it would be nearly an entire year after William's murder before Martin would strike again. On November 28th, 1900, Martin would travel to Castle Rock, Washington, and commit his second and third murders. I don't think Castle Rock is really that far away from Kelso. I think it's like, I mean, you could drive I think it's an hour drive or something like that, really close together, if not shorter. Back then, it probably took a little bit longer. But he was on the river and all that kind of stuff, so, yeah. He would commit his second and third murders in Castle Rock. Cornelius Knapp, which, by the way, Cornelius is an amazing name, and his wife were sitting down at their dinner table for supper when Martin Stickles shot them dead with a rifle through the window. Much like his first murder, Martin Stickles would steal everything of value from the Knapps before leaving. This time, however, he did not set the house on fire. There was some sources that said that he set the house on fire, but the majority of them said that he did not set their house on fire. Not much is known about how he was captured or even suspected, but he was picked up for questioning. And when he tried to protest his innocence, the investigators told him that they had identified a watch and keys that belonged to William Shanklin that was in his possession. So I'm not quite sure. I don't recall any of my sources really saying how they even suspected to pick him up or anything like that. But whatever had happened and whatever reason he was picked up or arrested, like, I don't know, he might have been arrested for something entirely different. They found some things that belonged to his first victim in his pocket. So Stickles would go on to confess to all three of the murders after the revelation that he had those items in his pocket, and he did try to implicate an accomplice in these murders. He claimed that his neighbor Edward Pierce was actually the mastermind behind them, and that he, Stickles, was only there to steal the valuables. His claim was heavily disputed by the fact that there had only been one set of footprints outside the windows of the victims, and the victims had been shot from. Pierce had also been confirmed to be occupying his scow on the Columbia at the time of the murders. So Mr. Stickles tried to blame all of this on somebody else, which, I mean, most people do. So I can't really say that's a bad thing. I mean, it's a bad thing, but please don't, if you do something wrong, don't try to blame some of the other people. But it's not uncommon for people who commit murders or some kind of crime to try to blame it on other people. In December of that year, the prisoners of Pierce County Jail were visited by the Salvation Army, and Martin Stickles would convert to Christianity. They didn't really say what denomination he was before his conversion to Christianity, only that he converted to Christianity. He would admit to one of the priests that he was the only person to commit the murders. And it's sad that despite his looming death sentence, I misspelled said. My bad. It's said that despite his looming death sentence, Stickles was cheery, and he would be happy with whatever the court sentenced him with. He did plead not guilty when he was arraigned before the Superior Court, and lawyers and family members declared that Stickles should be given a lighter sentence on account of his unsound mind and unnaturalness. However, after an hour of deliberation, the jury did find him guilty, and Justice Miller sentenced him to hang. Stickles would walk to the gallows on January 25th, 1901, where he is said to have stood before 150 witnesses and state, "Gentlemen, I bid you all goodbye. God forgive me. This is the last time I'll see you on this shore. Jesus help you all. Jesus take me now." Stickles' hanging was considered to be botched, even though he died nearly instantly. Yeah, it was pretty gross. It was a fairly gruesome hanging, in my opinion. Apparently the sheriff who was officiating his hanging had never done so before and used a rope that was too long. Because the rope was too long, it had a guillotine type of like effect on Martin, and instead of like yeah, snapping his neck instantly, the rope, because of its length, would actually sever his jugular. Yeah, his jugular vein in his neck. And it would spray blood all over a Kelso merchant who was there as witness. And this Kelso merchant would become violently ill all evening, and the man would have trouble tailing for, I think, the remainder of like his entire life. This man would have trouble telling the tale and need to sit while he did so, as it made him, quote unquote, weak in the knees. Stickles' body would be released to his mother for burial after his death. So that is these two gentlemen who were murderers in the early 1900s and late 1800s. Martin Stickles, I think he had a mental health disorder. He might have also had an intellectual disability, like we don't know, we weren't there, but just reading some of the stuff and to go by what some of his, like his lawyer and stuff like that said about his unnaturalness, quote unquote. Probably he probably had some kind of mental health disorder. Like I said, even though I'm going to school to study this stuff, I don't have the wherewithal to be able to assess and diagnose somebody who is not alive and not in front of me with so very little information. When it comes to Billy Gohl, I don't think he was criminally insane in any way, shape, or form. I think he was perfectly cognizant, and I think he had his wits about him. And I think what he did to those men who put their trust in him was very calculated. And I think he enjoyed killing people. I think the robbery was secondary almost. I think after a certain point in time with Billy Gohl, I think the robbery was secondary. I mean, like, people got to eat, I guess, but I think he enjoyed the killing of these sailors who put their trust in him. He was a Union official, after all, during these murders. And that's a pretty important, like back then, a Union official. I mean, even now, like Union reps are an extremely important part of being in a union. But Union officials back then were really important. Like they did all kinds of stuff, like they acted as banks and they act, like as, intermediaries and all, I mean, like a lot of different stuff. So for him to kill the people who had put their trust into him with everything that they had, making their money and all that kind of stuff, and their livelihood, I think he enjoyed that. I think he enjoyed the power that he had over these people, their life and death and everything like that. And I think he enjoyed inserting himself into the investigations when it came to declaring the Aberdeen police departments as inept and incapable of doing their jobs. They probably weren't very great at doing their jobs, but they did catch him eventually, and he did, there was justice. Even though he was only technically charged and convicted of 2 of the murders, there was justice served. I don't think he should have been taken to that hospital. I think he should have remained in the state pen, but that's neither here nor there. So I hope you enjoyed that episode. I want to try to, I keep saying this ever since I started school, but I want to try to get a little bit more regular with episodes. So hopefully it won't be so many weeks between episodes after this one. I'm going to try to focus more on the spooky aspect and cryptids and stuff like that rather than true crime. I might wiggle in some every now and again, but yeah. So that was the tales of Billy Gohl, and as I said, do not confuse Billy Gohl with David Grohl. David Grohl with an R. And Martin Stickles. So keep it spooky, keep it weird, but Don't murder people and steal their stuff. Definitely don't do that. All right. Enjoy the rest of your day.